setting up some more race baiting, and I also see them setting up gigging the rich and yada, yada, yada. Mr. Obama is quoted as saying, "I've got a pen and I've got a phone. I can use that pen to sign executive orders and take executive actions and administrative actions that move the ball forward. I've got a phone that allows me to convene Americans from every walk of life, nonprofits, businesses, the private sector, universities, etc." In other words, he's telling you that he is not going to necessarily wait for our elected officials to provide him with solutions or a law or input. He's going to use a phone, and I'm sure he has a smartphone. So what he's referencing is he's going to use digital media. He's going to use the alternate challenge. While you and I are talking on the radio, over the internet, there are groups out there that may be having a meeting on the same media, the internet, of 3,000 or 4,000 people. We've got to learn to leverage this technology as the opposition has, because they have definitely they've got one up on us. By the way, I forgot to mention, remember there's one other thing going on next week, and that's the Republican Men's Club monthly luncheon will be next, I believe it's Wednesday. It's the 22nd of January at the Luby's on Main Street downtown. They'll have a bunch of local candidates there. It's their candidates forum, and they've got a very exciting and motivational speaker set up to follow the candidates as time allows. I got a question for you. Where do you think America is ranked? And this is from the teaparty.net website. When the current administration took over in January of 2009, the United States was number six, on the list of economically freest countries in the world. Okay? Actually, it goes on to say, given the reasons behind the founding of this country, as well as parameters of the Constitution that's supposed to guide us, one would think we'd be in first place, but that's not the case. At least we were in the top 10. So, but when the administration began their assault on the Constitution and our freedoms and our pocketbooks, we fell hard and fast. We are no longer in the top 10. We are ranked 12th. Number 12 of the most economically free countries in the world. That's the reason I'm going down the path of the youth. This is going to have to be turned around, and it's going to take some time, and it's going to take the young people who are expected to support the current environment to really make that turnaround, help us make that turnaround. I don't want us to forget Benghazi. I don't know what's going on in the mainstream media in terms of reporting on it, nor do I care. And the reason I don't care is because I felt immediately that it had nothing to do with a third-rate video. That's like blaming the Doc Owen show for an earthquake. I mean, ain't happening. So I had no faith in what they were telling us. And the deeper we dive into it, as we are allowed to, by our elected officials, Darrell Issa leading the charge, the more we find out that is the case. We have now found out, we have firsthand knowledge of the fact from some retired generals who are beginning to speak up that the current administration and the president himself were told unequivocally within an hour of the start of the attack that it was terrorist driven. It was too well organized, it was too well manipulated, et cetera, et cetera. The administration decided, as has been shown and was also pointed out in Mr. Gates' recent book, to make the reporting on the events in Benghazi a political decision, because, as you know, it was in September, right before the election. So it was at a critical time. We've now learned that the situation as it went down was completely preventable, and this is very important, even a bipartisan committee reported that as such. So both sides of the aisle are concerned that we've not been told the truth about Benghazi, and more importantly, they are saying that it could have been prevented because we did not listen to the people on the ground who told us that our embassy, or whatever they want to call it, our annex, was not secure, that it was subject to attack and it was vulnerable to attack. And then just before I went on the air tonight, another report came out of, where is this from? FreedomOutpost.com, that 15 more Benghazi-related victims have been murdered. And that means, and these are 15 people, Libyans, non-Americans, because I don't know that they're Libyans. But they're not Americans. They were helping the FBI. They were helping the United States in their investigation of the events in Benghazi. And apparently, the implication is that what they had to say would not shed a very good light on the current administration, and somehow they're no longer available to give their testimony. Something I wanted to point out at the beginning of the show, and it just dawned on me when I looked at the date of that last article. This is I pay somewhat close attention to numbers, and this is 01/16/14, which is a number that adds to 13. All of my life, I have been pretty freaky about the number 13 on the bad luck side, but I've gotten some pretty strong input lately that should change, so I'm trying to change my thinking. So today's date adds to 13, so that's a good thing. It is and I've always watched the moon. You have to watch the cycles of the moon to understand what's going on in the world and human emotion going up and down. So tonight is a full moon night. It is absolutely the fullest. This is the date that is the full moon. So we've launched our show under a full moon on a date that adds to 13, both of which forebode a lot of success for the show. Just thought you might want to know that. So we're going to have a good time, and we're going to get some things done. One of the other articles that I have that I'd like to talk about, and we're coming up on about the 38-minute mark of the broadcast, so surprisingly, we don't have that much time left. This one talks about farm subsidies flow freely to D.C. residents who don't actually farm. This one's near and dear to me. $178 billion with a B. Nothing ever starts with an M anymore. I don't get that when we're talking about the federal government. I just don't get that. That's just way too much money, and it's too easy to say. I mean, it's $178 billion. Man, that's a lot of money. Oh, well, it's over a period between 1995 and 2012. It's still $178 billion, okay, that came from the Department of Agriculture. That's our money. And it was given to thousands of residents in and around the nation's capital receive, here's one, millions of dollars every year in federal farm subsidies, including working-class residents in the Southeast, wealthy lobbyists on K Street, and well-connected lawmakers on Capitol Hill. I'm not taking the approach that farm subsidies are bad. That's certainly not the case. That's just certainly not the case. What I am telling you is that the system can be rigged, that it can be pretty easily beaten. And I think that's what's going on. A long time back in the 80s, I had a friend of mine. This was a subject in the mid-'80s of concern to everybody, was about the farm subsidies and it being out of control, et cetera, et cetera. And this friend of mine came into work one day and announced that he was going to retire. This guy was about 33 or 34 years old. He had no means whatsoever to retire. But what he'd done was he said he was going to submit to the federal government a business plan for not raising pigs. And he was going to take the subsidy to not raise pigs. And his whole business plan showed a 5-year growth. He was going to start out not raising 20 pigs. And he felt like, based on the market, that he could grow that operation to not raising 1,000 pigs within 5 years and be pretty well off. I thought it was a very humorous approach to explaining the problem, and I thought you might enjoy it as well. So apparently there's a bunch of folks in and around D.C. that have started not raising pig farms. Okay. Another thing that I found interesting, that a Democratic think tank, okay, a group known as the Brookings Institute, they're well known for their Democrat-leaning studies. They have found Harry Reid and the Senate Democrats are responsible for the gridlock. Now, that's another one that, from me at least, elicits the response, well, duh. But their own side is telling us that, so that's rather interesting. Justifying this conclusion, the analysis opens with the observation that the House has passed twice as many bills as the Senate in 2013. Mostly to blame is the Senate committee process. I think mostly to blame is Mr. Reid's abuse of the committee process. And what bothers me is they think that the House is better because they passed more bills. Sorry, I tend to disagree. Every time the government passes what they call a bill and it gets turned into a law, you have just, and I, have just lost some rights. In other words, they have passed a law that said about something that mandates how it will be done, as opposed to with willy-nilly, with no reservation as to whether it's constitutional or not. That's why I was corrected one time when I was talking about backing the Constitution and the rule of law as if they were one thing. It was pointed out and explained to me that they are not. And that's also why things go before the Supreme Court, because we make laws and eventually somebody takes the government to task and says, no, I'm not going to do that, and here's why. And it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court to find out if it's constitutional or not. If it's not, then the law goes away. But if it is, it's upheld and yada, yada. But they'll go ahead and pass the law and allow and enforce the citizens to test the law. Unfortunately, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's upside down. You know, they're a bunch of lawyers, for goodness sake. They're a bunch of supposedly responsible citizens. You know, I grew up thinking they were our best and brightest. Well, anyway, I'm sure that that's not the case. Two more things real quick, and then we'll do a bow out. With first of all, that the CNN recently reported that they had an exclusive on a second Christie scandal, okay, having to do with Hurricane Sandy and his use of the relief funds, et cetera, et cetera. That they reported in an exclusive manner that the federal government was doing an investigation on how he used the funds. However, according to the federal government, that's simply not true. It is not going on. And CNN has refused to retract the story. In other words, they really didn't care whether it was true or not.